This podcast is intended to provide information for educational purposes only and to serve as a starting point for you to have a conversation with your personal physician. Nothing stated on this podcast should be considered medical advice. Consult with your physician before undertaking or changing any treatment plan.
These prices are really the symptom of a broken system as opposed to a single act or a single bad person kind of taking advantage of our healthcare system.
Hello and welcome back to the Pound of Cure Weight Loss Podcast. Today's episode is Novo Nordisk's Weekend at Bernie's.
Yes, so this is a little bit of a different show than we've ever done. I've been following this. We've been talking about Bernie Sanders, bringing Lars Jørgensen, the CEO of Novo Nordisk, in front of a Senate hearing. And so it finally happened at the end of September. And, I watched the whole thing. It was like 2.5 hours long. I watched the whole thing. I pulled out some clips that I thought would be interesting. And I was going to go through because I think as much as we look at policy and how laws are made and how all this stuff happens, it is very understandable. Like, this is something that anybody can kind of understand what's happening and where they're going. And I think you can really just see how much bureaucracy there is in getting anything done. And our political situation where neither party can stand the other party doesn't make for us able to kind of come to the middle and find some good policies, which is how historically this country has worked. But so anyway, I thought it was interesting. There was a lot to learn. But in the end, they kind of, they all kind of, there is a group think, and they all kind of come to a fairly similar conclusion. So this was the Senate Health Committee, and they are made up, it's a bipartisan group, and there's kind of two leaders of it. The first leader is Senator Bernie Sanders, and I think he's like the main head. Mm-hmm. But then there's also Senator Cassidy. He's a Republican constituent. And so they were both kind of the heads. It actually is Dr. Cassidy. He's from Louisiana. And so the two of them kind of headed up this. But then they had different members of the committee, and each one of them was given a chance to kind of ask questions and go through a line of reasoning. And it's partly showboating, and it's partly trying to get to the bottom of the problem. So the big issue is, and we're going to hear from Bernie in a second, that these medications are far more expensive in our country than they are in any other country. And so, there's a lot of background facts that brought on these hearings. The first is that Novo Nordisk's sale price, and I'll show you right here, Zoe, just a shot of Novo's sale price. Novo's stock, let's see, we're going to go through this. In 2022, the stock was somewhere in the high 50s, and they've reached a high of like 140, so they're running like 120, 140. So in the last few years, Novo's stock has more than doubled. So clearly this company has done very, very well as a result of Ozempic, Wegovy. And I think over 5 years, it's up 368%. So I believe I saw this coming years ago. I knew these drugs were going to be amazing, and I didn't buy stock in it. It kind of kills me.
Yeah.
But as a side point, so 72% of the revenue from Novo Nordisk comes from U.S. sales. So they make way more money from us than any other country.
Right.
That's the first point. These drugs are anywhere from 4 to 10 times more expensive in our country than in any other country. We also spend twice as much on healthcare as any other country in the world. And yet 85 million Americans are either uninsured or underinsured. We still have to pay a tremendous amount of out of pocket. Mm-hmm. And 65,000 people a year die from lack of insurance coverage.
And we're still sicker.
Yes. And we are less healthy than most other countries. Our infant mortality rate is in line with some third world countries. I mean, there's a lot going on with our healthcare system. And so when you see this happening and Novo Nordisk is making record-breaking profits, you're going to get brought into it. So let's start by kind of looking at what Bernie's introduction to this was, and he kind of outlines why we're doing this. So Here's the video.
Which shows that Novo Nordisk's diabetes drug, Ozempic, is sold in Canada for $155, in Denmark for $122, in France for $71, and in Germany for $59. In the United States, Novo Nordisk charges us $969, over 15 times more than they sell that product in Germany. Wegovy, Novo Nordisk weight loss drug, is even more expensive. As the chart behind me also shows, Wegovy is sold for $265 in Canada, $186 in Denmark, $137 in Germany, and $92 in the United Kingdom. In the US, the list price for Wegovy is $1,349 a month, nearly 15 times as much as it costs in the United Kingdom. What we are dealing with today is not just an issue of economics. It is not just an issue of corporate greed. It is a profound moral issue.
What do you think about that, Zoe?
I mean, obviously we've talked about it before on the podcast. It's just disgusting.
It's kind of a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, I just I feel like everything's crumbling in so many ways.
I mean, I think the healthcare system is starting to get a little bit to a tipping point.
It's insane. This is something has to change. This is not okay. It's not okay.
So I'm going to bring up a second image here, and I'm going to explain why I don't really see it changing much over the next 5 years. So this is a chart of the top 15 political candidates who have received funding from the healthcare industry. This is just 2024. Of course, the top two people are our current presidential candidates, with Kamala receiving over $5 million in funding from the healthcare industry in 2024. Trump is substantially lower at about $860,000, but still a lot of money for Trump. Some interesting things on there. Nikki Haley is also on there. And Bill Cassidy, who we're going to hear from, is on there. He's one of the people on the Senate committee.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah. So, we just have we have the politicians are bought and sold by the healthcare industry. And if you look also at that graph, it's not Democrats, it's not Republicans, it's like a 50-50 split. This is really not a partisan issue. The winner of this election, neither of the candidates, whether we're talking about flipping the Senate or the House or the presidential candidate, no matter what, they're still going to be heavily influenced by the healthcare industry. And so I think that's really the state of affairs. So when we look at something that's happening, and in many ways, I think what we're going to see is that these prices are really the symptom of a broken system, as opposed to a single act or a single bad person kind of taking advantage of our healthcare system. It really is. It's because, and we've talked about that in the past with our creative dosing strategies, how, when the system's screwed up, there's a little chink in the armor, and you can kind of take advantage and save some money, and you have to do things a little bit unusually, but it can save a tremendous amount of money and give you access to a drug that you couldn't otherwise afford. And so there's something in our healthcare system and the pricing that doesn't make any sense, and you can leverage that to your advantage. And we do that every day in our practice.
And it's kind of like this problem has probably been here for a really, really, really long time. But now with the widespread use and like this life-changing class of medication and all these drugs, it's now just really having a spotlight on it's utilizing the GLP-1s as kind of this on the pedestal, look at this problem, but there are probably so many other drugs that this is happening with as well.
This is happening with chemotherapeutics. This is happening with radiation treatment after cancer. The problem is it's happening on like these little one-off situations. It's just one case here, one case there, rare cancer, this drug, that drug.
Millions and millions of people.
We have millions and millions of people who want the same drug, and they really want it, really, really want it, and they can't get it because of it. So these GLP-1s are really putting a spotlight, like you said, on our healthcare system and kind of focusing it around a single issue, which is this drug. But like you said,
it's a systemic issue.
It's a systemic issue. I think you put it exactly right that way. So let's see what Lars Jørgensen has to say in his initial response, and interested to hear what you think about this.
Hard at work in making sure that patients have access via the insurance schemes. And today, 80% of all Americans with insurance have access to these medicines at $25 or less for a month's supply. So it's a price point at the pharmacy counter we have to talk about.
Let me just interrupt you if I might. Okay, you're correct that many people pay $25 a month for Ozempic, but what you're forgetting to mention is that many of those people are paying outrageously high prices for the insurance that covers Ozempic and other drugs. So simply this is a pass-through to the insurance companies. Bottom line is you are charging the American people substantially more for the same exact drug than you are charging people in other countries. And my question is, why?
I love how like straight, he just got straight to the point and asked the question. I think that's,
first of all, I don't see people getting this for $25 on average. I don't see 80% of our patients getting it. No way. I don't think 80% of our patients get it for $100 or less.
Right.
I see lots of patients paying $200-$300. And so I don't know where he gets that number, but I call BS on that number.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then second, I think Bernie's response was exactly right.
Yeah.
The health insurance is just, it's a way to spread out the cost over time. And so if it costs more, health insurance is going to be more. That's why if you have a cheap car, your car insurance is less expensive than if you have an expensive car, because you're going to break it at some point and it's going to be more expensive to break. And so they're basically charging you for the future cost of repair.
Yeah.
It's almost forced savings to some degree. And so anyway, there's 190 million people do not have access to Wegovy. So that wherever he's coming from, that most people can get it for $25, that's not true. And again, we pay, whether if you're on a state-funded plan like Medicaid or Access or Medicare plan, it's paid for taxes. Who pays our taxes? We pay our taxes. Mm-hmm. We pay our health insurance premium. You work for our practice, you get a health insurance premium paid for you by the practice. If our health insurance was cheaper, you would get a higher salary. So the idea that either your employer or your insurance company is paying for a drug, that's not how it works.
We're paying for it. No matter, it doesn't it's going to come from somewhere.
You pay for it. You pay for it instead in lieu of wages or in taxes or somehow you are paying for these drugs. Okay. So Bernie has some other interesting points here, and I think this is also some good stuff.
This year, Dr. Alison Galvani, an epidemiologist at Yale University, conducted a study on Wegovy. And what she found, and I hope Mr. Jørgensen pays attention to this, is that over 40,000 lives a year could be saved if Wegovy were made widely available at an affordable price to Americans who need the drug. 40,000 lives. I ask unanimous consent to insert that study into the record. A few months ago, Dr. Melissa Barber, a healthcare economist at Yale University, conducted a study on the cost of manufacturing Ozempic. And what she found is that Ozempic can be profitably manufactured for less than $5 a month. We all know the cost of production is not the only expense by far for a drug company. Pharmaceutical companies spend great sums of money on research and development to find new treatments, with many of these products not coming to market. We all understand that. But it is important to know that this drug can be manufactured profitably for a few dollars a month. We may hear from Mr. Jørgensen that Novo Nordisk spent $21 billion on research and development since 2018, and I take his word on that. What he may not tell you is that Novo Nordisk spent $44 billion on stock buybacks and dividends over that same time period.
So I think that's another great point, which is whatever they're spending on research and development, they're spending twice that much on buybacks and other things that are going to increase their salary, their profit. And so clearly, if you're buying back stock, it means you have lots of extra money. And again, so Novo Nordisk stock is up 360% over the last 5 years. The price is 5 times as high as what it is in the US. And they're able to do buybacks that are twice, $44 billion, or able to do buybacks twice what they're spending on R&D. So clearly, this company is cleaning up. And at the same time, 40,000 people are dying. And maybe if they made a little less money, I mean, as much as I hate to sound like a socialist, and God knows I'm not a socialist, but maybe if they made a little less money.
I mean, if we think about it, $1 billion less dollars, they'd still have their $43 billion to do their stock buyback with $1 billion to make that. I mean, I remember we did the math on a previous podcast where I can't remember exactly which one it was, but where it was like, if we took this small amount.
If we could buy it for what Canada can buy it for, I think we like 5 million people or something, I said, could get the medication.
Yeah.
Just by getting rid of the PBM spend and paying what we pay in Canada. Which is Canada is the second most expensive country to get this from. Right. And to me, there's something like, as a doctor, and I run my own private practice here, and you're certainly involved in how we make decisions and the money and all of that stuff. And you understand there's a business, and you have to make money because that's how businesses survive. But at the same time, we also have core values like putting our patients first and always making sure that the decisions we make are in the best interest of the patients coming to us, because we chose healthcare as a profession, and that comes with a set of ethical guidelines that you have to follow. And so the truth is, most doctors think that way, most nurses think that way, most healthcare professionals think that way. The problem is health insurance companies and pharma companies don't. And somehow the health insurance companies, it's because the doctors have been asleep at the wheel just working and treating patients. But somehow we basically said, you can't trust the doctors to make these decisions that are best for your health, even though we're the ones who took an oath. We're the ones who see you, who feel with you, who see your suffering firsthand. We can't be trusted to make financial decisions because we'll make biased decisions about your health care. Instead, we've basically given that control to the health insurance company and the pharma company.
Who don't care.
They don't care. They don't see your suffering. They don't sit with you at the bedside. They don't see the pain. They don't hear your stories of discomfort. Or if they do, they outsource it to someone in another country to answer the phone on their customer support line. And so we've given this control. We've given them the financial leverage to make all your decisions on healthcare. And they have not been doing a very good job. It's illegal for physicians to start a hospital in the United States?
That's so stupid.
Isn't it stupid?
I was just thinking, I wonder how different things could be if they had doctors running, at least on the board of... Okay,
so here's the problem. Doctors aren't immune either. So this is this is a complex issue. And with every complex issue, there's going to be both sides of it.
Of course.
So let's hear from Dr. Senator Cassidy.
Why shouldn't a doctor be able to start a hospital?
Because we might be biased and
help patients.
And do too many surgeries that people don't need. That's the thinking.
Wow.
But anyway, so this is Dr. Senator Cassidy, I believe, he's from Louisiana. And he is going to talk a little bit about this. He has received $258,000 from Pharma and Healthcare in 2024. He's the 11th highest recipient on the list. And he also voted against the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a very big and broad act. It was Biden's Build Back Better, whatever act. But that was also, in that act was where Medicare can now negotiate with the pharma company. We talked about that too on the podcast. Medicare can negotiate with for up to 10 drugs, and every year they get to add 10 new drugs that they can negotiate with. I think another important part of this whole hearing is that you can pretty much count on that when they release the next set of medications, which should be coming out fairly soon, and I think it's either 2026 or 2027 when the negotiations can begin, because they announce it and then 2 years later it happens. You can guess that Ozempic is going to be on the list. I think that's pretty much a foregone conclusion at this point. But anyway, so let's hear from Dr. Cassidy.
But let me say, without a profit motive, without something in return, it's unclear that these drugs or any drug is going to be developed. There is a tension between the need to incentivize innovation and the ability to afford that innovation. And we are here struggling with that balance. Now, if anyone thinks going after big pharma is the silver bullet that if you do that, boom, healthcare costs or drug costs go down, they don't understand what happens with pricing a drug. There is no silver bullet. But as my friend Angus King says, there is silver buckshot. You do a little bit here and a little bit there, and it adds up so the drugs become more affordable. Given that, we still have to preserve the profit incentive for the creativity for drug companies to invest in order to develop the drugs that are going to positively affect the burden of disease in our society. So, as this committee examines the affordability of GLPs, we have to also examine how do we preserve that incentive for the innovation.
I agree.
Yeah.
And it's very, very well put, because if there wasn't that incentive, we wouldn't have any new drugs.
Absolutely. The problem is, and I think this is something that we're getting wrong as a country, is that there is this pendulum, right? It's either favoring the pharma company, favoring the big industry versus favoring the people, right? So in a perfect world, we would just give the Ozempic out for free to everybody because that's what's best for the people. But of course, that would reduce the innovation, as Senator Dr. Cassidy has put. When you're putting $21 billion in research and $44 billion in buybacks, that pendulum was shifted too far. It shifted too much in favor of innovation. Right. On one hand, you could, once you discover a drug, it's yours for life, and you're the only one who, for the rest of the history of the world, can produce that drug. That's not good either, because that drug's never going to make it out to market. It's not going to get to the people. And so there has to be this balance. And in my mind, the balance is shifted too far in favor of the pharma industry, in favor of the patent holder, and we have to shift it back. So I agree with him that there has to be this tension, but I think what we're seeing is that tension is pulled too far to one direction.
Snapping. It's like a rubber band, and we're on that end about to let go.
Yes, exactly. And one of the rubber bands is laxed, and the other one is, pulling it all the way.
Yeah.
And so we need to move it back to the center, not to the point where Ozempic is free and screw the patents and that's all over.
Right.
But so I hear where he's saying, where he's coming from with this, but I think that there's more to the story.
Right.
So let's hear from Dr. Marshall. So there's a couple of docs on this committee. I do like our physicians in the government. And
is that going to be in your future?
It's like my total secret little fantasy.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yes.
Maybe
like once I'm done with surgery, mid 60s to run for Congress or something like that. I would love that. Honestly, I would love that. I would create so much trouble. Okay, so here we have Senator Dr. Marshall, and this is where really the hearing starts to take a turn. And I'll be honest with you, I don't necessarily disagree with it. So let's hear what Dr. Marshall has to say. Again, he's The senator, Dr. Marshall, is from Kansas, and he's a Republican. So here we go.
Novo Nordisk is not the villain in this story. Novo Nordisk is not the villain in this story. They're a hero. We should be here celebrating this miracle innovation that's responding to this diabetic epidemic we have in this country. It's a miracle drug. Now, we all agree on this committee across the Senate that the cost of health care is too much and that prescription drugs are too high, especially the out-of-pocket expenses. But we need to figure out who the villain is. Who is the real culprit here? Who's making the money? So on this particular poster, you've said it once, you've said it twice, everybody up here said the same thing. Whatever the cost is, whichever number we want to use, Novo Nordisk keeps 24% of it, and the PBMs extract 74%, 26 and 74%. So really the PBMs are making the bank here. So let's talk about PBMs for a second here. The real culprit in this room, in this story. So these three big parent companies, the three big PBMs control 85% of the industry. Their gross revenue last year was $800 billion. Their parent companies, gross revenue, $800 billion.
So this is where it all shifts toward blaming the PBMs.
Well, I'm glad.
Yeah. So I think a little bit of history, too, is that this committee also put out the PBM Reform Act. And we've covered this also in past episodes. It really asks for more transparency. So PBMs, and we're going to hear a little bit more about this, make their money by saying the role of the PBM is these pharma companies are screwing you, and we're going to negotiate with them, and we're going to bring the price down, which clearly they're doing an absolutely terrible job at. If the drug costs 4 times more here than in any other country. So immediately the premise of this entire hearing really brings the necessity or need for PBMs into question, because they're clearly not doing as good of a job as anyone else in the world. So
it makes me think, like, if the drug company was in charge of setting the price, or, instead of the PBM middleman, and we know that X drug could be, manufactured with a profit margin at $5 a month.
Right.
Without that PBM middleman, like, what would they? Oh yeah, like, what if we do $10 a month? We'll still make buckets of money, and so we'll help so many people.
Right, and I think that's a little overly optimistic at $10 a month, but maybe it'd be $150.
Well, yeah,
and that would be a game changer for so many people out there. But anyway, so I think another really important thing. So back to the PBM Reform Act, it hasn't gotten passed yet. They're hoping that it's going to get passed early next year, but all of the political machine is just kind of grinding on this thing. And again, it's because these health insurance companies and these numbers that I put up there with Kamala taking, 5.8 million and Trump with 800 something thousand of donations this year. That's not just pharma, that's all healthcare fields. So probably the majority of it is from these $800 billion revenue companies of Cigna, Aetna, and United.
A drop in the bucket.
Right. And so, which is also, that's such a good point. It's 800 billion and they're paying 8 million to influence. Right? So that's 10,000 times. They're making 10,000 times as much in revenue. 1/10,000th is what they're using. They're using such a small amount of money to get the influence that they need to make such a huge amount of money. The return on investment on that political money is remarkable, because it takes a relatively small amount of $250,000 to a senator, and you're going to influence the way he or she is going to vote. So anyway, so there's some frustration in this committee that this act has not been passed too. And so we're going to really take a shift. But I think one last thing on the PBMs, they make their money on that spread. So what happens is Novo Nordisk says, oh, Wegovy's $1,300. And then the PBMs negotiate it down to $600. And so then they go back to the employer and that the health insurance company, which owns them, but eventually this money gets passed to the employer, where they say, hey, we saved you $700. We get to keep 25% of it. So the higher the starting price, the more money they make off of every prescription. And we'll hear more about that in these coming videos.
CVS said lower list prices would open up access for obesity treatment in particular. United Health Group OptumRx said given the significant price differential for these products across borders, a decision by Novo Nordisk to align U.S. pricing more closely with those in other countries would meaningfully increase access for U.S. patients. So with that in mind, would you please commit to lowering the list price of these drugs?
So, Senator, allow me to share a few points before I answer your question. Yes. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. So, the experience we have is one of losing access when we lower price. I know you can always find specific plans that did include insulin with a lower price, but the broad, totality is that less patients have access to our medicines when we have lowered the price. I understand that perhaps the PBMs have changed their mind, and I'll be happy to collaborate with them on this, because anything that helps patients to get access and affordability, we are supportive of.
I don't really understand.
It's the spread pricing. So when he lowers the price, PBMs make less money. We've talked about that before, where the PBMs will say, oh, you need to go through our pharmacy for the 90 days.
Right.
And what they'll end up doing is they will tell you, oh, we don't cover this cheap medicine. We only cover the more expensive medicine, because the PBM profits more on that medicine, because they get that spread pricing difference. And the cheap medicine, they don't make any money on, because it's cheap to begin with.
Yeah.
And so that's what he's saying. And the problem is he's right. He's right that like lowering the price of a medication, you may limit access to patients.
Wow.
Which is, when that is a true statement, that is so paradoxical. It really shows you that whatever is going on with the way drugs are bought, sold, distributed, and authorized for insurance payment, it's so totally broken. Now, what Bernie did, and I don't think I have a video of it, but he had secured from the PBMs in writing a statement that said that if you lower the price, we will continue to cover and provide access to Ozempic.
Oh.
So he did secure this, and his goal, I think, is to get them to lower the price. But the truth is, he's just kind of warming them up for the Medicare negotiations coming down the pipe. But the fact that that's the explanation is, and it's right. It's not a lie.
Yeah.
To me, that's a kind of a crazy. It's a crazy statement.
Reality. It's crazy reality.
Crazy reality. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the next video.
Are there ways to reduce these perverse incentives? We're asking for suggestions here. Perhaps this will come in ongoing discussions with the committee. But in your time here, do you have some suggestions to reduce these perverse incentives to deliver savings and value to the patients in need?
Thank you, Senator. We should really unite around what help patients. And if you have the industry making big risks in R&D, making big commitments into manufacturing, and then we have to negotiate against PBMs and their insurance companies not taking much risk and yet benefiting from a significant fee linked to the list price, I think that's absurd. So if we could stop linking their income to a list price, I think that would create an incentive that is not as absurd as it is today. I would prefer doing business on the net price, where I compete against competitors based on what is the real price for our medicine and what is the value of the medicine. And these are medicines that are addressing societal challenges that are paramount. And we talk about the cost of the medicine, but it's really the cost of the diseases that's breaking the system. And we have to find a way where we transact in a way where it becomes much more transparent what is the real price of the medicine, to really adopt the medicine and mitigate the societal cost that diabetes and obesity is putting on the U.S. Healthcare system and economy?
I think this is where they really talk about the PBMs. I think one of his points, though, which I think is a total BS point, is that, well, we have to talk about the cost of the disease. And so these medicines, even though they're expensive, the disease is so much more expensive. That to me is like if I'm on ER call and a patient shows up with appendicitis and I say, oh, well, it's going to be $100,000 for me to take out this person's appendix. And they'll be like, that's crazy. It's a 45-minute surgery. Why would I ever pay you $100,000?
Mm-hmm.
Well, because if I don't do the surgery, then the patient is going to end up in the ICU with sepsis, and it's going to cost $100,000 to take care of them. And that's a BS answer, right?
Yeah.
And so when you say these drugs reduce the burden of cost of diabetes, that ignores our responsibility to our patients. That is a very financial decision. And the problem with healthcare is that it cannot solely be a financial decision. There is an obligation to patients, and you cannot look at every opportunity in healthcare as a mechanism to extract as much money as you can out of the system.
Well, and I mean, we can look at the cost of disease in all of those other countries that are delivering this medication to their patients.
They're not paying the full cost of the disease. Yeah, that's a great point. I think kind of my final thoughts on that and the cost and the perverse incentives is if you really think about healthcare, and let's look at every piece of this. Can we provide healthcare without the pharma industry? We can't, right? How about without doctors? Of course not. Nurses. How about speech therapists, audiologists, durable medical equipment, hospice? Can you provide healthcare without all of those people involved?
It's a ecosystem that requires everybody.
You require everything. Can you provide healthcare without health insurance? Without PBMs?
Without PBMs.
No problem.
Yeah.
Without health insurance, you can still provide healthcare.
Yeah.
And yet, $800 billion of revenue is going into the companies that aren't actually involved in providing the healthcare. They don't actually provide anything of value or use, no service. And so they really have just figured out a way to insert themselves into the equation, into the payment equation, and have it come up with ways through political means and business means and kind of controlling the market to extract a huge amount of money out of the healthcare system without actually contributing anything. And so, in all honesty, I think as much as you start watching this and you want to be like the pharma industry, they're screwing us. This is a total ripoff. Novo Nordisk, they should be thrown in jail. I don't know that I really think that that's the true problem here.
Right.
I think they are a symptom of a broken system, and they're just pricing it. They're leveraging it just like our patients are leveraging our creative dosing strategies, taking advantage of a little chink in the armor.
Right.
And that the ultimate problem is with the companies who we've put in charge of controlling their healthcare expense, and they really have been derelict in that duty. So let's move on to video 8.
Making a profit on your Ozempic product when you're selling it to Australia for $87 and you're selling it to the US for $9.36. Are you making a profit at $87?
Yes, we are. And the price you mentioned in the US is not what we get. That's the list price.
So what are you getting in the US? What price?
So I mentioned that on average for our products, we give 74% in rebates to PBMs. And
that was a chart that Senator Marshall held up, that PBMs are making 74% and you're getting 26%.
Yeah.
So you've got a screwed up industry. Number one, when I've talked to other pharma folks, they regret that PBMs ever came into it. It would seem like, since you make the product, that you could disassemble them or do something that would go around it if, in fact, this place won't do something about it. Have you ever thought of that?
It's very difficult, Senator, because they control what insurance is put in front of patients. So they have integrated themselves with insurance companies, and we negotiate against the PBMs, but they're owned by the insurance companies. So no matter what we do, they decide what products patients
Okay,
get.
and I
So,
think we-
I mean,
Oh
a
my
lot
gosh.
there,
Oh
right?
my gosh.
So much there. $85 and they're making a profit.
Yeah.
Imagine if these drugs were $85. What a difference that would make. And so even Novo Nordisk, this gigantic pharma company that has the blockbuster drug of all blockbuster drugs, is powerless when it comes to fighting against the PBMs.
Right. And he's like, yeah, I'm only making 26% of that.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if
Which
you're-
means 74% of that cost, and it's probably not the full 74%, is going to the PBMs and to the healthcare industry. I mean, United Healthcare is the 11th or 12th biggest company in the world, and they're just U.S. healthcare, you know. So anyway, a lot there, a lot to learn from this. So this is let's do our final video, and we'll wrap this episode up.
Disappointed in your company and all big pharma is the marketing that they do. I think that the marketing is very influential. I really think that Congress needs to go back and revisit that as well. I think that the marketing is so good. There's people on this drug that shouldn't be on it and are being taken advantage of. And so I do think we need to go back and look at that. Again, instead of coming after the hero of this story, we need to look in a mirror. America needs to look in a mirror that nutrition is a big problem in this country and lack of activity.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
So I think so. He's basically acknowledging that healthcare marketing is a problem, and I think it is.
It's all reactive. It's not preventative, and it's not, going from the root of the nutrition and the movement and just our, kind of overall culture and what's being prioritized, because it's not making money.
Yeah, I mean, even think about your childhood. You're younger than me. When you were a kid, what kind of commercials were there that were on TV? It was Coca-Cola, McDonald's.
Oh, yeah.
It was, Jordache jeans. Well, that's probably a little before your time, but it was, clothing and very retail type items.
Yeah, like different like toys. Like there was like, the Barbie dream house that I wanted.
Right. But anyway, now it's all pharma.
Yeah.
All pharma. I mean, go on and
And
watch.
yeah.
Pharma ads are what you see. And so that's another issue. And so I think, the last thing I would say to Senator Marshall's comment, though, is if we're going to look in the mirror at our nutrition and our exercise, which, again, absolutely needs to happen, we also need to look in the mirror at our political system.
Well, I thought that's where he was going with it. I thought he was going to say we need to look in the mirror to say, let's fix something with this PBM insurance, big pharma situation and fix it. I was, yes, we do, again, need to look in the mirror and look at the nutrition and movement, but like, can we look in the mirror on those other, like, kind of bigger items?
The thing that kind of struck me here, too, is that we've got the U.S. Senate. We've got the huge mega pharma company, and they both feel powerless when they're battling against the health insurance industry.
Can they not have representatives? I mean, they don't need that. Insurance people don't need to. Why would we?
They've got all of the politicians bought and sold. They've figured this all out. They've got lawyers up the wazoo. And that really, to me, is when I watched this, that was kind of the take-home message, was like, even these guys who really should be kind of captains of the universe are unable to penetrate this crazy health insurance thing we've got going on. And the problem is we're looking at, to some degree, it almost feels to me very much like what I saw with the housing market like 2005, 2006, where it was like craziness, crazy prices, crazy profits, people making crazy money. And it was this, system that was just about to break.
And then it did.
And then it did. And the problem is if they're making $800 billion and they want to get to 900 and $1 trillion, at some point, this will all come crumbling down. And the problem is, and it's going to be bad, just like the recession was our homes. This is going to be our healthcare. And so what happens? People are still going to get sick. They're still going to need hospitals. They're still going to need doctors. And when this whole thing comes crashing down, what happens? That's
the people lose.
The people lose. And so I'm really hopeful that at least we get this PBM Reform Act passed. I think that's a really important first step. And then, as much as we're seeing the government kind of going after some of the monopolies from Google and Facebook and looking at them, I think it's just as important, probably more so, that they start looking at these health insurance. And maybe they're not monopolies because there's, 3 or 4 big companies, but they really are. They're duopolies. They're controlling the market with their size at the detriment of the U.S. consumer, the U.S. patients. And so I'm hopeful that we start to see some activity there. And I don't know that this is all going to come crashing down in a weekend like like it did with the recession. It's going to fall apart kind of brick by brick, and there's going to be an opportunity for us to step in. I really just hope our political system is strong enough to do it, because we're counting on them.
Yeah.
All right. A big episode, a lot to unpack. I think for those of you who stuck with us and listened, I appreciate you hearing this. And we're coming into an election cycle, and please make sure that you do your research and you look at people's voting records when it comes to pharma, and when it comes to health insurance, when it comes to your healthcare access.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We'll see you next time.